All right, 49ers training camp is coming up. So we thought that we'd go with a no-nonsense preview of both sides of the ball. This is going to be defense, and every single position group is going to be covered with a focus on some of the battles that will be coming up in training camp. So David Lombardi here, Guy Haberman joining as well. You ready to do this, Guy?
I'm ready. July 23rd. That's when the vets report.
Yes, vets report July 23rd. Rookies around a little bit earlier, but I think it really gets real once the pads come on, and that's probably going to be about 4 or 5 practices in. And then the first preseason game is on August 10th in Nashville against the Tennessee Titans. So that's very much a part of training camp. I mean, it's grueling practices, flight out to Tennessee, preseason game, which will feature a lot of the young players who are fighting for position spots during camp. Then everybody flies back down to New Orleans temporary camp location, Irvine and New Orleans, two very different places. 49ers will practice with the Saints there, come back up to play the Saints at Levi's. And I think that will be the wrap of camp. And then you enter full preseason mode for the game against the Raiders.
Yeah. So you've got, well, like you said, we'll do position by position, or I got some just general kind of big picture thoughts and specific thoughts. The way I thought about this, and we have an offensive preview as well, was just like when I walk out there on July 23rd, what's at the top of my list? Some of those questions, probably most of them will not be answered on July 20. Well, it won't be July 23rd or whatever day it is, right? But let's begin. Where do you want to start?
Well, we could always pop open the handy depth chart. This is a 90-man 49ers depth chart with a projection. The 53-man projection is on the left side of this dividing line right here. Now, I am not married to this projection. In fact, what I learn out on the field over the course of camp will alter my projection. And I would also remind everybody that it's not just about the 53-man roster. It's also about the 16-man practice squad. And the way that the rules are set up now, there's more flexibility than ever. So the 49ers will be definitely considering who's more eligible for the practice squad, who they need to protect on the 53-man roster once the cut down goes. So we're going to focus on defense in this video. So I'll zoom in a little bit on the defensive half of this depth chart. And we can start with the secondary. Why don't we go reverse order for this one? Because the secondary, to me, this is the deepest that they've been under Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. All the teal here represents a new veteran signing. The green here represents a new rookie addition. So Renardo Green, fittingly shaded in green, and Malik Mustafa, cornerback and a safety, both draftees, both fairly high draftees for the 49ers. These are two guys that I believe will have a really, really good shot at early playing time. And however they perform throughout camp and how they progress throughout camp will, I think, really determine so many dynamics of how the 49ers run their rotations over the course of the early season, because you've got the whole nickelback question. Is Deommodore Lenoir going to have to play inside and outside? And then the whole safety question. Back when Talanoa Hufanga broke into this team in 2021, he started as the third safety. They ran a lot of 3 safety sets. So I'm wondering if Malik Mustafa can force his way onto the field in a similar fashion.
I'll say this real quick for people watching on your YouTube channel. They probably know this. For people watching on mine, they likely know it. If you're listening to this on my podcast, you can't see it. This is David's depth chart, which you make available. Is it in the bio on your Twitter page? What's the fastest way for people to find this?
I'll put it into the description of this video because I
great.
get asked this question a lot. I'm not good about making it too public. I've tweeted it here and there. It's a Google Doc. It's literally just a Google sheet, right? So you need the link, but I'll get the link out there.
Okay. So I'll try and put that. Hopefully it's in the description of my stuff as well. So I agree with, to me, I when I think about the 49ers secondary, David, I think about the corners and the safeties very differently. I think it's as comfortable, if I could use that word, as I've been with their cornerbacks coming into a season this time of the year in the offseason, like you said, in the Lynch Shanahan era. To me, after watching minicamp, which is just a small piece of the ultimate puzzle, but I would say right now, I feel pretty good that I think what's going to end up happening is Isaac Yiadom starts at one outside corner spot, of course, Mooney Ward at the other spot, and Deommodore Lenoir, who's probably their second most important cornerback, starts at nickel. I think there's less questions at those spots than there have been at any point in time. I think at safety, there is a question for me. Do they have two true starting safeties that can really work? Hufanga's coming off an injury. Jair Brown was never fully cut loose at any point last year. Kind of yo-yoed back and forth with a veteran. Are those two going to be able to just play together and be a really are they going to be able to be a good tandem, because they haven't really gotten that opportunity because of the Hufanga injury? Will Mustafa be ready to spell them a little? Or will we look up 5 weeks in and it's like, yeah, George Odom's just played a lot of snaps. I don't know. So I have to, in terms of how good I feel about the secondary, I have to separate corner and safety. Yeah, I like the players at safety. I just don't, I'm not confident that it all fits together yet.
Well, I think that a key question that comes up related to what you're saying is, are they done adding at safety? Because earlier this offseason, they were very clearly interested in continuing to bolster this room. They offered Rayshawn Jenkins a contract. Rayshawn said that it was the same contract that he eventually signed with Seattle, 2 years, $12 million. That's not an insignificant amount of money. Jenkins said that he preferred Washington state taxes to California's, by the way. So that was his reason for signing with the Seahawks. The 49ers also
two not great options if he's worried about taxes.
Yeah, seriously, but maybe those were his only two options. He was coming from a Florida team. He was coming from Jacksonville. And
if the Niners were up against a Canadian team, they would have had a shot.
That's as close to Canada as you can get, but I guess not tax-wise.
Not tax-wise,
up in Seattle, yeah. Anyway, the safety free agent market has been moving very slowly this offseason, to the point where obviously people are still talking about Justin Simmons right now. We'll see what happens with him. He's still actually out on the market. That's probably going to be something that gets done right before training camp. But Tashawn Gibson Sr. is still out there, and John Lynch said that the 49ers have been staying in contact with him. So he probably is staying in shape just in case the 49ers do want to bolster this room. They also hosted Julian Blackmon, who re-signed with the Colts this offseason. So to me, they've broadcast consistently throughout several months that they're interested in adding another body to this safety room. Now, Talanoa Hufanga, when he spoke during veteran minicamp, he made it sound like he really wants to be back for week 1, but it didn't sound like he was going to be back for the start of camp, which to me, that only intensifies the potential need for another body in this room. So you can get through. You have these guys, Taylor Hawkins, Eric Harris, Jalen Mahoney, who's the undrafted free agent out of Vanderbilt. You have those guys to play the position during camp, and maybe you want to give them more reps. But I still think that the acute desire for a veteran safety couldn't have just gone away, right? Just because Talanoa Hufanga's rehab is going reasonably well. Like, if they wanted to pay $12 million for Rayshawn Jenkins a few months ago, what happened in between now and then for them to not want to add another veteran safety? So I would be on the lookout for that. That's for sure.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that could happen, right? Maybe, and I agree with you, right? The premise that they're still on the lookout for a safety. But to answer the question, could anything have happened that would lessen their desire to sign a safety? Maybe 2 months ago, they think, kind of like Brock Purdy, Sam Darnold. Now, Darnold, I think, would have been a good signing anyway, even if Brock was 100%, because he turned out their second best quarterback. But, maybe 2 months ago, they think, where are we we better get a safety net for Hufanga. And then 2 months later, maybe they feel great about Hufanga. So that would be probably the only thing. Minicamp's not enough time to look at Malik Mustafa and go, oh yeah, never mind. We don't need Justin Simmons, right? So I agree with everything you said there. I think I want to go to Renardo Green, who you mentioned, and this will be one of the big early, like when the day the pads come on, and we'll talk about this at other positions and on offense, but the day the pads come on, Renardo Green's going to be at the top of the list of players to watch. We'll see if Brandon Ayuk's, by the time you're watching this video, because we're recording this, maybe Brandon Ayuk's back on the Niners in full human form. He's back. But whoever he's going up, if it's Ricky Pearsall, a rep against Ricky Pearsall, if it's Debo, if it's Juwan, however he gets lined up, watching him with pads on whether or not he looks like a guy that can really contribute. Mustafa as well, but I
I
think
mean, whether or not he looks like a dog.
whether or not he looks like a dog. Yeah. Does he have that dog in him? I'm going to
Well,
Photoshop a little dog on
he
him.
allegedly said it 15 times, which I think was an exaggeration because then the 49ers released video of John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan actually talking to Renardo Green on that phone call, and he only said it a couple or a few times.
Yeah.
But according to Lynch, he said it 15 times. He called
Okay.
himself a dog 15 times. And I told not Clemson, where did he go? Florida State's defensive coordinator, Adam Fuller, told him about that story, and he just started laughing. He was like, yeah, that sounds exactly like Renardo Green.
Yeah. I talked to a guy on the Florida State staff as well, and that matched his description also. But think about the point I wanted to make on him, David, is think about the Packers and the Lions and the impact that those two teams got from second-round rookies last year. The Packers got 10 touchdowns from Jaden Reed, who was their second-round pick. The Lions, now their picks were higher than the 64th pick that the Niners used for Renardo Green, but Sam Laporta was the 34th pick. Brian Branch was another. They had 2 home run picks in the second round, was the 45th pick. This year, they could have taken Green at 61. They took Ennis Rakestraw 3 spots ahead of the Niners from Missouri, a cornerback. So when you look at the NFC and the teams that the Niners got the biggest competition from last year to go to the Super Bowl, those two teams hit home runs in the second round of their drafts last year. Those players immediately impacted the team. Is Renardo Green in a position to do? Is he going to put himself in a position to do it for the 49ers this year?
The best competition that he faced over the past 2 seasons, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Ricky Pearsall. And he was awesome against all 3 of those guys. Twice against Thomas and against Neighbors. Florida State beat LSU twice, and Renardo Green was ready for the bright lights both times. He led the ACC in pass breakups. I mean, he's a gamer, right? The biggest games he showed up. And one thing that Mike Norvell said when I talked to him, and Adam Fuller said the same thing, the DC, because I had concerns watching his tape with some of the pass interference penalties. There were 4 of them that were fairly damaging this past year. And they were steadfast in saying that his best football came immediately after the penalties, which I think is a really, really important trait to have in NFL. 49ers fans probably remember Brian Allen, the 2020 game, Niners, Dolphins, the practice squad corner. 49ers were decimated and they had to bring him up. And it was a complete disaster, right? Ryan Fitzpatrick lit up the 49ers and they just started picking on Brian Allen, and over and over and over again. It was a snowball effect and he couldn't hide. And I think the defense gave up like 44 points, maybe 43 points that afternoon. So it's resilience and the ability to wash down a negative play that to me is probably the most important psychological component of an NFL ready cornerback. And the guys who are closest to Renardo Green and his development say that he has it.
Well, I mean, if you're drafted in the second round, then it's reasonable to think that if there's a spot that is not completely solidified, and I would say there is one, even though I do believe what I said earlier about Isaac Yiadom, because I think there's a lot of heat on him too. Like it feels like there's some under the surface momentum on people feeling like this is the shot he's been needing. But if you're a second round pick with all of what you said, then you should put yourself in a position to play right away. And as we know, that position starting is only part of the game, right? I mean, contributing is really important. Darrell Luter is another guy that he's, everyone's been waiting to see.
And we saw him at OTAs, long limbs, exactly what you want out of a corner. He's got that ability to get into those passing lanes. He had an interception that was a nice play at OTAs. And Yiadom is not small either. And that opportunity that he had last year with the Saints after Paulson Adebo went down, he seized it. Yiadom had 13 pass breakups last year in half of a season. Charvarius Ward led the NFL with 16 or 17. So, I mean, if Yiadom would have played the whole year, he probably would have had the most PBUs in the league. Yeah. And so
Was he targeted a lot? Is that why, or was that a high percentage of his targets that he broke
That's
out?
a great question. I haven't seen the efficiency stats in that regard. I've seen the tape. I've seen the pass breakups. They're legit, but I don't know what the target rate was to get those. But then the overall numbers, the rating into his coverage and everything was really good. It was a very, very solid second half of the season that Yadam put up. Now, he hadn't delivered that prior, and he hadn't been a consistent starter prior to that, which is why the 49ers were able to get him for what, 3-4 million. They're able to get him at a very relative discount. So this is his chance now to secure big time money before it's too late. And, and that buys him some time too. If Yadam really is that corner that we saw with the Saints last year, then yeah, he could be the outside starter in a nickel package. It allows Lenoir to play inside. Renardo Green, by the way, has been working on the inside corner spot to begin for the 49ers this offseason. They believe in teaching it inside out. They think he teach the inside first, and then he could flex to the outside. So there are multiple different spots where Renardo can play, but I don't think there lines up to be immediate pressure on him to play, which is maybe the best way to develop a rookie. We do have to remember, Guy, that this is the NFL. These are the 49ers who have played all these marathon seasons, and they hope to play another marathon season. It's not just about this first line of players when it comes to who's going to start during the year. Ward he's listed in red here because he's coming off of core muscle surgery, right? Yadam could get hurt. Lenoir can get hurt. Guys can miss a game or two at a time. In that case, you could end up in a Brian Allen situation if your second string depth isn't good. And I think Luter's got a lot of potential. And we haven't even talked about Rock Yassin. This is a really solid NFL player who's kind of buried on the Ravens' good defense last year. So that gives the 49ers even more breathing room. And you know what? With all of these guys, I don't have Ambry Thomas, Samuel Womack, or Kamon Hall making the roster. That's amazing to me that they've been able to, at least on paper, create that kind of depth.
Because Ambry, you got to give Ambry Thomas credit. Like I think battled himself back to solid, after it felt like he was a real liability for a period of time. Now I got some of the PBU number, the PFF numbers usually vary from some of the other numbers because it's, they grade it, they write what they see and somebody else puts down what they see. But so they've got him for 11 PBUs, with Ward leading the league with 17, Darius Williams with 15, 2 with 13, 1 with 12. So 11 is, tied for sixth, basically.
Yeah.
Same as Brian Branch. In 44 targets, he had 11 versus, say, L'Jarius Sneed, who had 12 in 102 targets.
Oh, that's a ratio right there. Wow.
He also had a missed tackle percentage of 19%, which is high.
Yeah.
Mooney Ward's 7.5%.
Mooney's been one of the best tacklers in the league. He actually led the league in missed tackle percentage, I believe, the year prior. It was only like 3 or 4, and it went up to 7 because he missed a couple more this past year.
And PFF has him for 5 missed tackles and 56 tackles. Now, 19%, that's 4 missed tackles out of 16. So it's not a ton of tackles for Isaac Yadam, but the number is the number. So, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's promising for sure. And that's what all you can do really at the corner position. You have to just stock it up with troops because you don't know who had a career year last year, won't have a career year this year. Guys are going to fall off. Guys are going to surge. Guys are going to get hurt. So you just have to have options. It's a lottery of sort, right? And you maximize your chances. You make your luck in a way at the corner position. Why don't we move on to the second level of the defense? Because these guys have to cover a lot as well. The linebackers. We expect Dre Greenlaw to start the season on the PUP list, physically unable to perform. So they signed Devondre Campbell, who was an all-pro just 2 years ago for the Green Bay Packers. He's that veteran linebacker who's the favorite to be the number 2 behind Warner. But I don't think that's going to be a shoe-in for Devondre Campbell. And stuff can also really evolve over the course of the year because it was really interesting when Fred Warner came out at OTAs and said, yeah, D Winters has had the best OTAs of anybody on the team. He's like really, really bullish on the second-year player out of TCU. So my wonder here is, will D Winters immediately usurp somebody like Demetrius Flanagan-Foles for the 49ers third linebacker spot while Dre Greenlaw's out? And then if yes, if that's the case, how long before he threatens to take Devondre Campbell's role as the number 2 linebacker. And then you could talk about all the permutations of that once Dre Greenlaw comes back. But to me, D Winters is the big wild card in this equation.
Yeah, I would say the way that I summarize the way I look at the linebackers right now, and this is probably a dramatic way to say it, but I'll say it this way to make a point, is can anyone other than Fred Warner actually play? And of course, the answer to that is yes, these are NFL players. But what I mean is think about the Niners defense at every other level from a best case scenario. So the best case at corner, we already talked about a little bit. The best case at safety is Jair Brown can really play and Talanoa Hufanga is healthy and they can just play together. The best case on the D line is that they've upgraded the edge spot opposite of Bosa and that they're solid up the middle. And if all those things are true, the question then becomes, if you're looking for a weakness, is the second linebacker spot going to be an obvious person that gets targeted in the passing game?
Where it was an obvious weakness was in the second half of the Super Bowl.
Exactly. Oren Burks, I don't know how many times he got targeted, but I think it was like 6. It was a lot.
Yes, it might have even been more.
Maybe
but
8.
I think it was a perfect completion percentage from Patrick Mahomes to whoever he was.
Exactly. So you don't like, you're not going to get Dre Greenlaw, but can you get a level of play, a high enough floor here that you don't have just an obvious target?
It's about the floor. You're exactly right. It's about the floor. It's not about the ceiling. And that's why they first tried to bring in Eric Kendricks, and then he decided to sign with Dallas instead. And then they brought in Devondre Campbell. What's the commonality between those two guys? They're both veterans who are obviously past their primes, but because they're very solid veterans, Campbell, again, I said all pro just 2 years ago, you expect there'll be a reasonable floor with both of those players. It's not, the bottom's not going to fall out on you. So that's the hope. Now, if D Winters can show that he's developed in his second year into a player who has a reasonable floor, probably has much higher upside than somebody like Devondre Campbell, just because he's younger, right? He's younger. He's going to be more explosive, but they're going to give that second spot to the player who's not going to screw things up. They're not going to give it to a high volatility second year guy who, you can't necessarily trust in that position. So for Winters, it's a consistency thing that he has to show.
Well, you're right, but I would say now this is the case with every team in the league because the NFL is just filled with really good players and really good coaches. But just think about the 49ers schedule. And if you've got a guy who either A, doesn't know what he's doing, or B, is athletically, it's just such a boost if it's D Winters because of his athleticism and speed, right? Because you just think about, like, you're going to face Aaron Rodgers and the Jets weapon. Like, here comes Breece Hall with Aaron knowing exactly where he is. You're going to face Kevin O'Connell, good weapons on the Vikings week 2. You're going to face McVay and Stafford week 3. You got Kyler running around week 5. You got a very good, I don't know, the quarterback I think is capped, but I think it'll be a good coach in Ryan Grubb and the OC and the Seahawks and good receiver weapons. You're going to play the Chiefs. You're going to play Dallas. You're going to play the Packers and LaFleur and Jordan, like, so many weapons. You're going to play the Bills. I think Caleb and the Bears, by the time you see them, like, they could have a good little thing going. They got talent on offense. You're going to play Miami, Mike McDaniels. You're going to play the Lions. So you really, because you're a good team, you're going to play good teams. The way the rotation works, you're going to play good teams. If you've got a hole, they are going to dig into that sucker. Like one of those, movies where somebody gets a bullet hole and then the other guy sticks his finger in there and starts. It's just, you're not going to be able to hide it. You're not going to be able to hide. And so even if D Winters doesn't quite know, but he's fast enough, maybe that's the better option. I don't know. We'll see.
And again, the options can evolve over the course of the year. That's the beauty of having some young and talented players, is that over a 20-game season, they're getting reps in practice. The occasional rep at the third linebacker spot plays about 30% of the snaps. That could get them ready for that second linebacker spot. So it's not like you have to start this season the way that you want to finish it, because A, Dre Greenlaw is going to be returning at some point, and B, Devondre Campbell, having played in the system before under Dan Quinn with the Atlanta Falcons, having, established a track record in the league, he might be able to take you the first 2-3 weeks of the season while you test D Winters out at that third linebacker spot. spoon feed him, give him a little bit more responsibility on a week-to-week basis, and then he could take over that second spot until Dre Greenlaw is back. And maybe Greenlaw is going to take a couple months to get back up to full speed. That's another possibility too. These Achilles, they're tough. I mean, they essentially ended Navarro Bowman's career. He went from an all-pro player, his best season in 2015, to a player that was barely hanging on there in 2017. 49ers cut him. He finished with the Raiders. Now, Bowman was a couple years older at the time of his Achilles tear than Dre Greenlaw was at the time of his, which I think is significant, right? Bowman, I think, was already 28. Greenlaw was 26. Those 2 years, physiologically, it's a big deal because Greenlaw's still ascending. He hasn't quite hit that athletic prime, which for men comes at around 28 or 29. And when it comes to injury recovery, especially from something like an Achilles, if you want to regain at least close to full explosiveness, I think that the timing of that injury, you want it to happen earlier rather than later in your lifespan as an athlete.
You'd like to bring up Michael Crabtree, who came back, played, and then was actually kind of better the next year. But I think it's two things. One, it's different. It's a different position. As a receiver, you know where you're going. As a linebacker, it's reactionary. And two, Crabtree never relied on speed. That was never his best trait.
No,
right?
And you're heavier at linebacker too, so there's more.
And you're heavier at linebacker. Yeah. All right. So let me ask you this. Let me ask you this then. We haven't got to the D line yet, and this can lead us there if you're done on linebacker. But true or false? Outside of the quarterback, Fred Warner's health is the most important to the 49ers this year. Not because he's the second best player, but because the drop-off is so massive.
I mean, he might be the second best player.
He could be the second best player.
It's so hard these player debates are tough because each guy has such a different job and a different body type and a different skill set across different positions. But yeah, I mean, Warner, his ability to not only just play the standard linebacker position as far as be the quarterback of the defense, he's the guy with the radio in his helmet, but he's able to blitz. And of course, we know how well he can cover. He is the bridge that connects the defensive line and the secondary in this defense. That linebacker position in general is the bridge that connects the secondary and the defensive line. And that's why the 49ers have been so intent on trying to get versatile guys. Almost every single player in the linebacker room has some sort of DB background. Between Warner, they created a position for him at BYU where he was kind of this slot player that was covering receivers often. D. Winters recruited as a safety. Greenlaw was the fastest player on Arkansas's defense. Demetrius Flanagan-Foles was a safety at Arizona. Somebody like Tatum Bethune, when we talk about his potential, he's Renardo Green's teammate, by the way, at Florida State. His potential to make the team, 7th round pick, is going to rely on how well he can cover, how well he can loosen his hips and cover, because that's going to be so important at the NFL level. So anyway, to circle back to your question, Warner is extremely important because the game, especially offensively, has evolved in a way to where poor linebacker units can be exposed. And Warner takes away one of those worries with how good he is. And the 49ers are now worried about that second linebacker spot in the nickel defense. And that's going to be a huge worry until they solve it this season. So yes, Warner, as part of that tandem, they're relying on him. And it's a good thing he's been durable, and you can knock on wood. We never like injuries, but he's been durable, and he's going to need to stay durable for the 49ers this season. It's a really good point.
One more thing on linebackers too, before go ahead and make that point. Just
no, I was going to shift to, I said you made a really good point, and I was going to shift to defensive line because linebackers are the transition, but we can't shift because you have another good point to make.
I would imagine there's people watching this or listening to this right now going, because I've been asked this and you probably have too, and this circles back to kind of the, what are we going to be looking for at the end of July? Malik Mustafa, like, because of his thickness, there's a question out there about whether he could transition or contribute somehow as maybe a third linebacker on this defense.
He's built like a mini linebacker, that's for sure. Ball and muscle.
So that'll be on the list, I think, of other pads. Come on, what are we watching? Maybe that's one.
It's fascinating because the 49ers have some multi-positional talents. We saw it a lot too when they were running the 3 safety sets back in 2021 with Talanoa Hufanga. Anytime you do something like that, then you have to take somebody who's technically part of another position group off the field. So that's why it's beneficial to have safeties who can come down to play in the box, or linebackers who can go out and cover, because you can run these amoebic defenses, so to speak. So it'll be fascinating to see what Nick Sorensen does to really utilize the diverse skill set of his talent on the back end, and what Brandon Staley's influence is, because Staley has dealt with adaptability and maximized it in the past, usually from a DB oriented approach, right? Jalen Ramsey was playing all over the field at the star position for the Rams under Brandon Staley. Then Derwin James was very, very flexible as well for the Los Angeles Chargers when Staley was the coach there and running the defense. So I think that the 49ers have the weapons to be really creative. I just don't know exactly how they're going to be deployed. And they might be a little bit short here and there because of that Greenlaw injury, because of whatever might pop up over the season, and it might require some creativity. Now, one place where I think creativity is definitely going to be alive and well is the defensive line, which has so many new faces. I mean, again, Teal are free agent acquisitions. Green, rookie acquisition. Evan Anderson over here, he's a nose tackle, undrafted free agent, got a $280,000 guarantee, which is big for UDFA, which leads me to believe that they think he's going to stay in the building, at least on the practice squad this offseason. But the Malik Collins, Jordan Elliott, Malik, by the way, is a trade acquisition, not free agent, but he's a veteran on the team now. Elliott, Floyd, and Yetur Gross-Matos, they made a very clear message, Guy, that the play along the defensive line outside of Nick Bosa and Javon Hargrave last year was not sufficient. They didn't re-sign all too many players. The one guy they brought back was Kevin Givens. They let a lot of players walk, and they have infused fresh blood into the room because they need to improve on run defense, ranked number 26 in EPA last year. And they obviously want more production sack-wise from DE2. Chase Young gave him a little bit, but not enough last season.
So as I look at it, let's say you dress, are you okay with this premise? You dress 8 defensive linemen for a game?
Yes. Sometimes there will be 9, but most of the time there's 8, and it's basically a rotation of 4s, right? Two groups of 4.
So as I see it, there's 2 spots open as we go into camp, if it's 8, okay? Because you have Nick Bosa, 1, Leonard Floyd, 2, Javon Hargrave, 3, Malik Collins, 4, Jordan Elliott, 5, Yetur Gross-Matos, 6.
Yes.
Do you agree with that? Or is there any?
I agree with that. And I would also look at it in terms of ends and tackles, right? So you could group it into 4 ends and 4 tackles. But yes, go on, because I do agree with that premise.
Yeah. So then the question is, what I just named 3 ends and 3 tackles, right?
Yep. So 1 spot each.
So you get 1 spot each. Maybe there's a second. But I also wonder how the new kickoff rule is going to affect positionally. Is it a defensive lineman maybe that you like, or is it a offensive lineman, or is it a tight end that you actually prefer to have?
Well, you would prefer somebody who has the speed of a wide receiver and the size of a defensive lineman, and you know who that is. That's Robert Beal Jr. So I think, to answer your question about the kickoff rule, I think that he's going to be a weapon on special teams. Beal ran under a 4.5 at Georgia, or coming out of I mean,
so you think it's likely that he's the 7th person on this list?
Yes, I think Beal is a very inside track because of just how damn athletic he is at a very large size. He's added a little bit of weight this year. They wanted him to be better against the run. He's no longer D Ford size. He's no longer 240, 245. He's probably around 257 or so. I'm sure he lost a little bit of speed. That's just one of the trade-offs that you make, but he's an absolute freak athlete. And I know that Chris Kocurek was really happy with how he developed down the stretch last year. They made him active last year. Then they didn't have to. They could have just shut him down for the season, but that he showed them enough in practice to where they said, okay, we can trust this guy to be part of that active game day roster in huge games, including the Super Bowl. So look out for Robert Beal Jr. Special teams and defense.
Shaquille Brown.
Shaquille Brown is the most intimidating physical frame out on that field. Did you see him at at first I saw him at the tryout. I'm like, who the hell is that?
What's he listed at? 330?
I don't think he's that heavy. He's above 300, but I mean, the guy, he's just huge. He's wide, he's huge. A lot of it looks to be muscle, looks to be good weight. And it's very rare that a tryout guy shows up and they sign him the next day to a roster this loaded. So that should tell you a little bit. It was like, okay, wow. This guy walked in, and I think Chris Kasarik looked at Shanahan and Lynch and said, you may have to make room on the roster. And he thought the same after the workout. So Shaquille played for Tennessee last year, second-year guy, but he got hurt early in the season. So he's been recovering from an injury. He's obviously healthy. They wouldn't have signed him if he didn't pass a physical. So, well, they believe that this is a potentially untapped potential just with the sheer strength that he brings to the table. He's one of the strongest players, if not the strongest guy the 49ers have on the roster.
And the other guy we didn't mention, who we would have mentioned this time last year, is Drake Jackson, right? Who's hurt or was hurt.
And that's probably going to be almost certainly, I would think, a pup situation. And I have him listed as that right here.
Yeah. Because
he put a progress photo up the other day, and it didn't look like he was that far along. I mean, it looked like he was still in a kind of a, I don't remember it exactly, but it still had a contraption on his leg. And was doing very ginger rehab. Let's put it that way. So I don't know. That's the only clue that I have on Drake Jackson, but I would just, based on what I've been gathering, what I've been sensing about the situation, he might be in the same boat as Dre Greenlaw. Pup.
Is that it for the defense?
Yeah. I mean,
Nick, I would say the only thing we haven't talked about, you mentioned it, and we won't see a lot preseason, but Nick Sorensen, right? First time defensive coordinator. That'll be a massive storyline this year. It'll be a huge storyline.
Yeah. Staley on the staff now too. You know, what they tried to do last year was they tried to bring in outside ideas, because Shanahan has felt the need to evolve, and he always feels the need to evolve. The NFL is a chess game, right? It's every single season, teams are going to try to expose weaknesses that they catch on tape. So you better, take the next step and stay ahead of the curve. So when they brought in Steve Wilks last year, the idea was, okay, let's bring in a defensive coordinator who's done some different things and have him learn our way of doing things and apply his style and kind of mix it, hybridize it. It didn't end up working seamlessly with Steve Wilks. There ended up being too much friction. It was very easy to sense early in the season. That Minnesota game when he ran that cover zero that led to the touchdown, I think is a great example. Kyle Shanahan was not pleased, nor should he have been. And as the season went along, I got the sense that Kyle Shanahan was probably having much more of a involved role with the defense to help get them back to basics. They moved Steve Wilks down from where he wanted to be in the booth down to the field, and just wasn't a good marriage last year. So they fired him a couple days after.
And I would add, David, and it culminated in the Super Bowl with Kyle using a timeout on defense.
Yes, and he was very upset about that.
Yeah.
So Wilks is gone, but look what they did this year. They've brought in another coach with a long pedigree who has worked in completely different style of defense, and that's Brandon Staley. Now, I think to fix the mistake, I think Kyle Shanahan feels that it was a mistake to put Wilks in such a high-level defensive coordinator role. To fix that mistake, they've made Nick Sorensen the defensive coordinator. He comes from in-house, so they can go back to what they were doing before. But now the fresh ideas are going to be coming in from a lower level whiteboard type of role in Brandon Staley. So they have acknowledged that they went about it the wrong way last year. Too drastic, too much of a shock to the defense to bring in, that outside voice. But they simultaneously acknowledge that new ideas are necessary. And it's going to be interesting to see if this new method will implement them in a better way.
The other thing I'd say is I think it'll be interesting 5 years from now, we look back. The Packers got Jeff Hafley, who was on the 49ers staff as a defensive back coach a few years ago, and then went to Ohio State and then went to Boston College. And I think is one of the more underrated, like the Packers are such a bright, or such a a big topic right now, rightfully so. But a lot of it focuses on the offense, and less of it is focused on Jeff Hafley. And I think it'll be interesting to see in hindsight, is Nick Sorensen the 49ers defensive coordinator for the next 5 years? Does it go okay for a couple of years? Do they have to change again? Did Robert Saleh return? Did the Jets? Like, there's this whole dynamic of, you had a guy that was on your staff. Maybe he turns out to be perfect, but for somebody else in the coaching tree and for Matt LaFleur. I think that's a little interesting storyline to watch this year.
Yeah, that is interesting. He went to Boston College, right, to be the head coach for a while.
Boston College. Yeah. Did I say? I might have said the wrong school. Ohio State and then Boston.
Did you say?
College.
Well, maybe he was at both.
Well, he was at Ohio State as an assistant, and then he became the head coach. At
Yeah,
Boston.
yeah. He went to Ohio State first, but I think he was the head coach at Boston College.
He was. Yep.
Yeah.
He was.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So from both the staff angle and from the player angle, we could toss this open one more time before we sign off. You see all that teal and some of that green, a lot of new faces. And let's be very, very clear about this. This is a defense that underperformed last year. The advanced metrics had them at about number 10. And for a defense that was number 1 the season prior, that just wasn't acceptable. There was a regression, especially against the run. I don't know if they have their nose tackle type like DJ Jones. Maybe they have him with Shaquille Brown. Maybe they have it with Evan Anderson. Maybe the combination of Jordan Elliott and Malik Collins gets it done better than Eric Armstead, who wasn't as good against the run. He was a good pass rusher last year, had a great pass rushing, but the run defense had eroded for Eric Armstead. Maybe the new mix of players allows the 49ers to get back up on the horse, but it's all a big TBD right now. So anyway, this is the defensive preview. Also have an offensive preview that you guys can check out. So this is us getting ready for training camp. I'll talk to you next time, guy.
See you, David.